So typical tasks for a CERT member. Again, I want to break it down to several core elements that you can easily reproduce. And again, you're going to adjust this to your protocols and what you need. But if you keep it to this, I think it clarifies the different roles to a level it's going to be effectively easy to reproduce. The typical tasks are going to be scribe, radio communicator, medical responder, and team leader. Above and beyond that, at least for the first several hours of your response, your roles are going to fall into one of these 4 categories. I would argue that the scribe is actually the most important position of any CERT team, of any response. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. I mentioned that earlier. That is something that is drummed into your head in EMS. If you didn't write down something, then there's no documentation of it, and either you didn't do it, it didn't happen, or someone's going to get sued about it. So that documentation is going to constantly be referenced throughout the incident. If you call in an incident, you're a damage assessment team, and you're calling the incident in to the staging area, your scribe should be documenting it, their scribe should be documenting it. And then as you're talking about it, especially if something comes up about that incident down the road, you're going to be referring to your notes. And there might be questions, hey, you smelled gas at this location, but you couldn't find an actual leak. Well, there's now a fire being reported in that area. What was that address that you reported at? Because we didn't write it down. Well, now you look at your notes and go, it was the address. Okay, that we're going to send a response team out there and see if that's where the fire is. That's just a basic example. It will be imperative that you have good notes, and the person being the scribe should be comfortable taking notes, should be comfortable with the different forms, and should be practiced on them. That doesn't mean that they're the only people who can do it, but this is a role that anyone can fill, but there are people who are going to be a lot better at being the scribe than others. Additionally, this is not a passive role. A lot of people think that the scribe is well, there's no other roles to fill. There's no other glorious roles to fill. Be the scribe. No, the scribe needs to be very active. The scribe needs to be actively seeking out information, asking questions. Hey, I need to know this information for my documentation. Hey, what's the address of this location? Or hey, what do you see out there so I can document this? Don't wait for people to tell you the information. Go get it. Go know what you need and go get it and make sure it's documented. At a core level, you want to ask the questions and answer the questions in your notes. Who, what, where, when, and how bad. The when is important because how long ago did this incident occur? Well, if it was 2 hours ago and there's not been a medical responder going out there to deal with it, okay, that could be bad. Or it's just something that's going to be referenced down the road, and it's better to have that information now. It may not seem critical as you're documenting what time is it right now when we encountered this incident, but in 2 hours, it's going to be critical to know how long ago this occurred. I hope that's clear to everybody. The radio communicator, again, is one of those core things, and I mentioned it earlier. If you don't have two-way radios, your response is going to be extremely limited. You're maybe a couple of blocks. That's about as far, maybe 3, maybe 4 blocks, depending on the size of your blocks. But you're certainly not going to be able to respond to a mile out from your staging area. And again, that radio communicator is actually responsible for providing situational awareness to the staging area, informing them, updating them. It's an active role. It is not passive. You're not answering questions on the radio. You're not waiting for your leader to tell you to radio this in. You should be aware as you're walking up on something, you see a flipped over car. Your team leader shouldn't have to tell you, radio this in. You should already be on the radio saying, staging area, this is North Damage Assessment Team. We're at this location. We have a flipped over vehicle, possible trapped and injured inside. Get the ball rolling ahead of time. Don't wait. Don't wait to be told to radio it in. And this is also where having a good scribe is going to come in handy. The scribe should know what you need to radio in And again, it's that who, what, where, when, how bad. If you have a good scribe with you and that scribe has already written down this information, as you're making that call in, you're looking over and the scribe is pointing at their notes with the bullet pointed items and underlining the key things so that you can just read it off their notes, you're going to be a very effective team and you're going to be very happy that that person is there with you. The other thing is that, again, it's not a passive role necessarily, but you're listening to the radio at all times. That is your duty. You're listening from communications from the staging area to other teams and from other teams to other teams. If someone is having a problem in one area, it might not be your issue, but it could be soon. That problem may go from another area to your area. So developing that situational awareness, always listening to that radio and being aware of what's happening in other areas is going to be critical. Disasters are never static. They're never, this happened and that's it. It's dynamic, it's ever changing, it's growing, it's moving, it's getting worse. And so you need to know what threats are out there so that you can let your team leader know, let your team know to be aware of this. You hear there's some naked man running around with a butcher knife. Well, he's running around and eventually he might get to you. So it's probably a good idea to be aware that this is happening and not, all of a sudden you see this guy who's, cut up 3 other teams coming towards you. It's important when you're doing radio communication to keep transmission short and concise, but always in plain English as well. Don't use 10 codes. You're not a police officer. We follow the standard radio protocol. We're using plain English just to avoid communication. If you don't have a good scribe, write down what you want to say before you transmit. If you have a great scribe and they're writing down what you need to say before you transmit, it's so much easier to read off your notes or someone else's notes than try and plan a message in your head on the radio while you're talking. The saying is, it's push to talk, not push to think. And you'll hear this all the time. You'll hear somebody talking on the radio and all of a sudden they kind of drift off and they've just completely lost their train of thought. And hopefully they'll say stand by, they'll recompose, and then come back on the air with a complete and coherent message. But that takes experience. It takes practice. You should be practicing on the radio at least monthly. In our area, we're doing monthly radio trainings to give you the chance to get that experience on the radio. Radio is not easy. It's not as simple as it seems to be. Pick up a radio, talk on the radio, done. When you pick up the radio for the first time and you key that push to talk button, your brain will go blank unless you've done this before or you just happen to be exceptionally talented. So try and get as much practice as possible talking on the radio. Compose your messages ahead of time. Know what you're going to say. Eliminate all the extra detail. Just go for the core. In a medical, you want to get across location, approximate age, gender, and chief complaint. That's what somebody wants to hear on a medical call. That's what the fire department wants to know when you call in and report an incident. For other types of incidents, location, type of incident, lives at risk, and damage to property. That's the core information that needs to get across. You don't need any extra detail. If they need to know more, they'll ask for it. So if you start composing your messages with those set details in place, you're going to have a good message and it's going to be good communication. So start practicing that if you can. If you're attending our radio trainings, this is the kind of information we're focusing on. We don't want you on the air for 2 minutes with so much extra detail that's irrelevant to what you need to get across. So I kind of mentioned this before, that scribe and radio operator pair, that's really the first buddy pair. If you have a good scribe and a good radio operator, things are going to go so well, so much better than if you don't. And again, they're an active pair. They're actively seeking information and actively relaying the information to the staging area. and providing information to the team. It's not, again, I can't stress how important this is. This is not wait until the team leader says to communicate. You're in constant communication. You're either listening actively to the radio or you're seeking information to provide over the radio. And when the staging area calls, they're not calling the team leader, they're calling the team. It doesn't matter who has the radio. Could be the team leader, could be the radio operator, it could be the scribe, it could be some random person that says they know how to use radios that you picked up along the way. They're calling the team, and the team is calling back. The next role is that medical responder. And again, in the early response, your damage assessment is just that. You're collecting information, you're collecting incidents and reporting them in. If you get to a massive accident and there's multiple injuries, you're not there as a damage assessment team to handle that incident. You're there to report it, and you want to try and triage it and stabilize it, but you need to move on. That role comes down to the medical responder, the incident response team that comes out from the staging area to deal with this. What they're going to be focusing on is triage. That means to identify those who will die without immediate medical intervention. They're going to be focused on treatment. This is something the damage assessment team can't really do. That medical response team is who's going to be dealing with that treatment, because this will take time. If you have multiple injuries, multiple people, it could take 30 minutes, it could take an hour, depending on what needs to happen here. If you need to transport people, transport them away from the incident to a collection point, to a place where the ambulances are going to show up or where they can get better treatment, that's something that this responder is going to be dealing with. But it's also important to realize that time is always a factor here. Untreated medical injuries, I mentioned that people will step outside during an earthquake barefoot and they will step on broken glass. That minor injury left untreated will become a medical emergency. Feet get infected. Injuries on the feet get infected. Those infections will kill people. So at the very least, if we're bandaging and cleaning minor injuries, we're going to be saving lives. And keep track of people's feet. That kills people so many times, or they lose a limb because of an infection, and nobody wants that. It's so treatable. If you can just clean it, bandage it, it's going to save lives. It's also important to remember that some people will not survive. And we've had drills, we've had exercises where people don't want to see death. And that's understandable. You're there to help, you're not there to deal with people dying on you. And it's traumatizing. It really is. But it's reality as well. If you're not prepared for someone to die during a disaster, then when it happens to you, you will not know what to do. You will not know how to cope. You will become a victim. You will cease to be a responder. So it's important to think about things ahead of time. What is this possible scenario? How am I going to deal with it? Am I capable of dealing with it? If I've never thought about it before, I'm going to become frozen and not able to comprehend and deal with it. But if I think about it ahead of time, I think, okay, I've dealt with this in an exercise. I was treating someone and they didn't survive. I've seen this before. I can kind of isolate that and move on. It sounds callous, but it is a reality, and you need to learn how to deal with that. You want to be compassionate. You're there to help. You're not there to, save everybody, unfortunately, because you can't. So try not to waste resources on someone you know who's going to die. And again, that sounds callous, but if there's a giant gaping hole in someone's chest, unless you're at an ER, and chances are, even if you're at an ER, that person is going to die. And that's the sad reality of it. If you spend an enormous amount of time and resources trying to save this person, you could actually lose people who you could have saved, who you had the resources and time, who had less severe injuries that could have been saved. And so you actually lose more people by trying to save the people you can't help. So it's important to understand and for the people who don't have medical training, even basic first aid CPR, I strongly advise you get that training. Get at least first aid CPR. If you can take emergency medical responder, if you have EMT classes available to you, get that level of training, because it's not just how to respond, it's how to assess an injury and figure out how bad is it and what's the next appropriate steps. Is this something I can deal with, or is this something that I need a paramedic for? Is this something this person needs to go to the ER? That's going to save you time, energy, and a lot of sacrifice, or a lot of unfortunate scenarios. So the team leader, this is the core of this training to some degree. It's important to know that the team leader is not the person who's going to be running into the scenario. They're not the one who dives in and wants to be all gung-ho and leading the team from the front. The team leader is there exclusively to ensure that the team gets home safely. They need to remain hands-off. They need to maintain situational awareness. They need to avoid developing tunnel vision. And that means they can't be holding the radio. They can't be holding the clipboard. They can't be holding the medical bag. They can't be the one with their hands on the patient. They need to step back. They need to keep a 360-degree look at the view. It's been said, left, right, front, back, top, bottom. Know all 6 sides of this incident. And keep an eye from possible danger. If there's something that's going to hurt the team, make sure you're aware of it ahead of time, you're tracking it, and if you need to get the team out of there, do so. That team leader is the boots on the ground, or the team is the boots on the ground. You're going to be communicating with staging, because staging, again, is blind, but staging has the overall picture. So you're going to be working with them to make decisions. It's important that a team leader also takes advice from their team members. You're not the team. Your team is. Your team members are. And as a group, you're making decisions together. But also, you need to be able to make rapid decisions. If you come across a scene and it is dramatically changing, it's dynamically changing and keeping things happen all the time, or happen rapidly, if you can't make a decision rapidly and keep up with the changing scenario, you're going to get somebody hurt or killed. So if you need to vote by consensus, you're probably not a team leader, but you should be able to take input from your team members. I hope that makes sense. I'm probably going to go over it a little bit more in depth over the next several slides, but a team leader, it's important to remember that the primary duty of the team leader is team safety. If the team leader goes hands-on, the team leader is no longer the team leader. I will emphasize that several times throughout the rest of this presentation. I want everybody to be able to remember this fact. If you think you need to be hands-on, don't be the team leader.